really, I say that not only is continuing to burn fossil fuels the crime of all time, but governments who are still pushing that, that's an unprecedented evil. I mean, my God, 10 million people a year being killed by air pollution from burning fossil fuels. That is damn evil. That's what it is.
Welcome, everybody, to the Climate Emergency Forum. Today, Dr. Peter Carter and myself, Paul Beckwith, are going to discuss global air pollution. The title of this session is Air Pollution, Particulates Matter. Many people around the globe are experiencing mortality or reduced lifespan from air pollution, from particulate matter. It's a huge problem that is not being addressed. In fact, it's a public health emergency, according to some doctors. So we'll let Peter start off, and then I'll talk about it, and then we'll have a debate back and forth about key points.
Thank you, Paul. So I go a long way back on involvement and learning about air pollution. But first of all, I want to say that we're really going to, of course, talk about fossil fuels, fossil fuel industry, fossil fuel emissions. And when we talk about fossil fuels, we really should right from the day one, we should have been talking about pollution, because our problem is pollution. And fossil fuels have two forms of deadly pollution, and that's air pollution, which we're going to focus on in this talk, and greenhouse gas pollution. And this is the worst pollution that we have ever encountered, and it's getting worse and worse and worse because governments are pushing fossil fuels, still pushing fossil fuels. So as Paul said, I'm a medically qualified doctor. So we have, the more we researched fossil fuel air pollution over the past 30 years, the more and more diseases and causes of death we discovered. And we started off with particulate matter. And then over the course of that time, the experts were able to research smaller and smaller particulate matter. And now, as Paul says, we're down to PM 2.5. And of course, similarly to how we found more and more human health systems involved, diseases by fossil fuel air pollution, we found that the smaller the particulate, the more deadly they are. And that's to be expected, because when we breathe in air pollution, fossil fuel pollution, that pollution goes straight into our bloodstream, gets into our lungs, and bang, it goes straight into our bloodstream. It's far more toxic than drinking some bad water, for example, or drugs that we may take, which could do us harm, because fossil fuel air pollution has this unique deadly capacity of going straight in our bloodstream, and thereby it goes into all our organs. Also, the more the research is done, the more people we find are being killed by fossil fuel air pollution. And there was the latest paper was published in April of this year, and that was specifically focused on fossil fuel air pollution, because of course there are other forms of air pollution which are also important. And that paper found that that fossil fuels were causing the death or contributing to the death of 10 million people a year. The other form of air pollution is ground level or surface ozone. And ozone is produced by a chemical interaction between fossil fuel pollutants and the warmth of sunlight. So as global warming increases, it's going to, and IPCC has determined this, it's going to aggravate both forms of air pollution. So fossil fuels are causing the air pollution in the first place, and by their greenhouse gas pollution and global surface warming, they increase the effect, the damage of that air pollution. So there'll be more and more and more deaths as global surface warming increases, driving up the highly toxic ground level ozone. The other form of air pollution, of course, that we've become increasingly aware of is forest fires. And as IPCC says, forest fires are being increased regionally by fossil fuel greenhouse gas pollution. And they're massive now. And they, of course, produce particulates, but of course, they also produce carbon dioxide. So they're increasing global warming. So because we're continuing, our governments are continuing to push fossil fuels, we have these toxic circles of interaction, which all are sourced, which all originate with burning fossil fuels. So all of these different aspects interact, and they're all going to continue to increase the death and disability that's caused by fossil fuels. And so really, I say that not only is continuing to burn fossil fuels the crime of all time, but governments who are still pushing that, that's an unprecedented evil. I mean, my God, 10 million people a year being killed by air pollution from burning fossil fuels. That is damn evil. That's what it is. Because we know the fossil fuel industry has been pushing this as well as governments. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to, continue on this vein of discussion. I've just done some research on what I can find in the public news forums, Al Jazeera, Yale Climate Connections, Inside Climate News, etc. And as you said, back in April, there was a study, a paper came out that said air pollution from fossil fuels is directly causing that almost 10 million people premature deaths. And of course, it's getting worse year to year. In normal years, the number may have gone down, probably did go down slightly with the coronavirus because emissions were way down and particulate matter was down, but those numbers need to be reported, and I'm not aware of a study out yet on that. But the medical doctors in the study were saying the situation is a public health emergency. It's having immediate impacts. Those people being killed each year by air pollution from fossil fuels, that represented in 2018 almost 1 in every 5 total deaths that year from all causes. The study used the global atmospheric model to map local air pollution caused by burning fossil fuels. It overlaid that with the latest epidemiological research on death rates in different regions and came up with the conclusions that it did. And it was specifically emissions from power plants, cars, trains, diesel generators, and coal used in homes. Now, also a very significant report, which is important to remember, is this is Inside Climate News, a report from last year. The title was "Breathing Polluted Air Shortens People's Lives by an Average of 3 Years," a new study finds. So this is worldwide, okay? Pollution, primarily from fossil fuels, was linked to more premature deaths worldwide than smoking, HIV, AIDS, malaria, and even war. Okay, now it gets into some of the details of the numbers. East Asia had the largest curtailment of life expectancy from air pollution of 3.9 years. Australia had the least damage at life expectancy reduction of 0.8 years. Now, this is across the population of the country. So you don't have to die from air pollution for it. It's shortening your life expectancy. North America, 1.4 years. Now you can compare that number of, the most recent number, about the 10 million deaths per year from air pollution, to smoking, which is responsible for 7.2 million deaths, or life expectancy shortening by 2.2 years. HIV/AIDS shortens it by 0.7 years, malaria 0.6, war and violence 0.3 years. So this is a world, we have a pollution pandemic worldwide. We need to be discussing it like this. 70% of worldwide deaths are also from non-communicable diseases like heart, respiratory ailments, cancers, diabetes, stroke. But air pollution actually worsens and exacerbates all of these things. And we're talking about ground level ozone, or smog, as Peter said, and PM 2.5 particles. That's particulate matter, 2.5 micron diameter particles. The smallest particles are the worst because they can get lodged deeply within the lungs, the alveoli tissue, and reduce lung capacity. And of course, there's many natural sources like fires, dust storms, etc. But fossil fuels are by far the largest effect on life expectancy. Now, I'm going to say one more thing that's key. There's a study just came out September 1st, so just a couple of weeks ago, and the title is, it was in Al Jazeera, it was in CNN. The Al Jazeera title, Pollution to Cut 9 Years of Life Expectancy Off 40% of People in India. These are people in the worst air pollution regions of India. Overall, for the entire country of India, and the huge population, it cuts off an average of 5.9 years of life expectancy. New Delhi is the worst polluted capital. 480 million Indians endure high pollution levels around in vast swaths of India, and it's concentrated in the capitals. It's not just India. Bangladesh, 5.4 years life expectancy reduction from fossil fuel emissions. Nepal, 5 years. Pakistan, 3.9 years. Singapore, 3.8 years. Some of the most polluted regions. CNN, just a few weeks ago, said air pollution is cutting more years from people's lives, and and they reiterate smoking, war, or HIV/AIDS. Okay, so this is an enormous problem that is killing vast numbers of people.
I think, as you said, Paul, of course, the research is focused on deaths, but underneath the deaths, there are millions and millions and millions more people who are suffering chronic illness because of fossil fuel air pollution, chronic lung disease, chronic heart disease. Air pollution actually even increases diabetes. And the people living in these highly polluted regions, and of course, there's no need for them to be highly polluted. In 1992, we had the United Nations Earth Summit, the Rio Summit. And there was a lot of work up to that summit, a lot of global research, environmental health and governance. And it's a long time ago, but the real reason for having that summit was that everybody realized that the so-called undeveloped, unindustrially developed countries were going to develop, and they had a right to develop. And so what the Earth Summit was all about was to make sure that they didn't develop using fossil fuels as energy. And there were comprehensive, specific plans to apply globally to make sure that didn't happen. Because, of course, if it did happen, it would be a world-destroying situation because of the huge numbers of people. And so it was agreed by all the governments that governments would contribute funds and technology, and the economics would be reformed. And the result of this was that these countries, by now, if the governments had honored their Earth Summit agreements, commitments, that China and India would be completely industrialized only with renewable energy. But we stopped that happening. Our industrialized, wealthy countries actually prevented that happening. So they didn't honor their agreements. And what they did instead was they pushed more fossil fuels everywhere. So
Yeah.
this is why it's really hard to, words don't describe this, you know. It's such an evil history that's been going on with
and you know, the focus with fossil fuels is always on the emissions and how it's affecting worsening climate change and extreme weather events, and you know, the Arctic and all this, all of the problems that we're having, the consequences of abrupt climate change now. Though, you know, those are what we focus on with the fossil fuels. That's why it's very important to have, you know, this topic, this video, because, you know, and also we can look at, you know, parts of North America, the air pollution was huge when, you know, after the wartime, right? New factories being built, you know, a lot of economic expansion. You know, there's stories of rivers catching fire in Chicago from the pollution, and there were no emissions on cars, and there was actually lead in gasoline, which was a particulate, which caused all kinds of medical problems, not just physical health problems, but also mental health problems. I mean, there's studies that show that kids that developed from a very young age that were exposed to high levels of mercury and lead actually from the tailpipes, the leaded gasoline. These people would have more violence as teenagers and cause more crime and have more mental health problems than people that were living in much with much better air quality. So, you know, and then a lot of regulations came in the US to clean this up, but those regulations weren't passed to countries, you know, the third world countries. You know, the industry companies just wanted the third world countries, basically they wanted them to do all the production, right? Manufacturing was outsourced. And all of these countries were mass producing products without controls on air quality. And now they're really suffering. I mean, the idea that everybody in India on average loses 5.9 years of lifespan. And if you live in the worst areas of India, that's 40% of the population of India, they lose almost a decade of their life expectancy. Their lifespan is down almost 9 years. How on earth have we allowed this to go on with the fossil fuel industry? Like, it's mind-boggling.
It's absolutely unbelievable that we are repeating the horrible situation of early industrialization in Great Britain, which is 100-something years ago. And we're repeating that. We're virtually imposing that on all of these populations in China and India. When I was a boy growing up in England, in the cities, everything was black. And we just took it for granted. It was all black. The town halls were black, main buildings were black. When I started at medical school, the surface of people's lungs, when we were doing our anatomy on cadavers, they were black. They had thick black plaques around the lungs. And so, yes, Paul, the mind boggles. How is it that we're allowing this to happen when we have spent years and years and years and years and years, right, populations and people, you know, complaining and protesting against this form of pollution like many, many decades ago. I think the Clean Air Act, the first Clean Air Act in Great Britain came in 1958, I think. It wasn't until I'd moved to Canada and I went back to England that the Clean Air Act had actually taken effect. So then all of these wonderful Victorian buildings are beautiful. You know, you could see the detail for the first time. You know?
It's an amazing story. Yeah. And I think one interesting thing is that the starling population, you know, the birds that lived in London, they were white. And then when the buildings started turning black, they had to evolve and they became black because they, you know, when they were white on the dirty buildings, they stood out as prey to other birds. So they evolved to turn black so that they could hide amongst the black.
That involved a species of moth as well. So I mean, it's quite amazing. So yeah. Why are we allowing this? I use the word evil. I'm not calling people evil. Okay, I'm talking about evil result. Okay, why are we allowing this incredible evil today in today's age with everything we know and all the history we know about? Why are we allowing that to happen in these particular countries? Are we saying that these people don't count? Right? I mean, surely we're not saying that. But from my point of view, it is it's like a conspiracy between the governments, right? The fossil fuel industry and the big investment banks, right? And they are absolutely determined. We have COP26 coming up. You know, I just read an article in a paper with a big failure sign with a picture of the Earth in the middle. Nothing's going to happen out of COP26. Why? Because these damn governments, right? Our own governments, right? Are pushing fossil fuels. I mean, it's staggering. It's absolutely staggering.
Yeah, I mean, I like to tell people that, you know, as people around the world might not be aware, I mean, we're coming up to a Canadian election in a few days, and you know, the party that has the most favorable climate change plan, this party still has purchased pipelines, and they promise, different political parties in Canada, they promised to phase out subsidies on fossil fuels, and they promised this about I don't know, 8 years ago or something, and fossil fuel subsidies have just gone up. And I was really hoping that after, you know, the COVID recovery money would go into new energy sources for the most part, but the subsidies on fossil fuels continued to go up. So, I mean, that's the real acid test of if a government is realistic and serious about addressing climate change, then it's vital that they remove subsidies from fossil fuels. Whenever we talk about carbon fee and dividend and carbon fees, those are what we need. Fossil subsidies are like a negative fee. You're giving money, public money, to fossil fuel companies to increase their business. It's a negative price on carbon. It's not neutral, it's negative. You know, it's just it's destroying us.
Paul, you remind me of the Stern Commission, the United Kingdom government Stern Commission. He was then Sir Nicholas Stern. He's now Lord Stern, and prior to he was head of World Bank, way high up in the world of economics. So they had him do this Stern Commission a study called Economics of Climate Change. And from my point of view, it is still the most important and brilliant study. So he, as an economist, and this was a huge comprehensive climate change assessment, actually, he said that what we were looking at in economic terms was a market failure, the greatest and most far-reaching market failure ever, which he said was due to, as you mentioned, two perverse economic practices, is what he called them, which eventually, if we allowed these to continue, they're going to wipe us all out. They're going to kill everybody. So the one is the subsidizing of fossil fuels, which is pretty obvious. And in 2015, of course, the International Monetary Fund, no less, came out with a comprehensive study of the subsidies and shocked everybody by saying there were over $5 trillion a year. So our governments are spending $5 trillion of our money in order to damage, destroy, and kill in the future. Our governments are doing that. So the other thing that the Stern Commission explained was that, actually there were three things economically, was that the practice of externalizing costs. So what this means is that the fossil fuel industry, which causes these massive amounts of ill health, chronic ill health, hospitalizations, deaths, they pretend those don't exist, or they use this mechanism to say that they don't have to pay these costs. And this has been going on for hundreds of years. We know what these costs are. They've been estimated. And you mentioned fee and dividend. And that's what fee and dividend is all about. That economically, as the Stern Commission said, it's economically wrong. I mean, they didn't use the moralistic term, but it's economically something that doesn't happen, that you are allowed in this day and age to externalize costs. The IMF put both together. They put together the fossil fuels direct subsidies and also the externalities that the fossil fuel industry doesn't pay for the cost of its pollution. All of that was supposedly corrected in the Earth Summit, by the way, and that adds up to over $5 trillion a year. They repeated their 2015 study, I think probably in 2018, something like that. And it was practically the same. It was still practically $5 trillion a year. And that's in economic costs.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's just incredibly, it's just unbelievable that this has been going on. And it's been very much, the number of people, on the order of 10 million people dying every year from air pollution that's from fossil fuel generated particles, ground level ozone and mostly PM 2.5 particles, 2.5 micron in diameter, are the killers. But also the idea that an entire country as big as India, it's been calculated that the overall life expectancy of people living in India has decreased by 5.5 years. And 40% of the population, it's decreased almost a decade, 9 years. Even in North America, it's like 1.4 years or something. Australia, places that don't have a lot of industry, they still get particulate matter that's come across the oceans. It's not their own industry putting it out, and it's almost a year. So anyway, it's a huge problem, and we need to, it's just not discussed enough. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this program. And if you've learned something from this video, then please like and share. And also consider subscribing to the Climate Emergency Forum channel. If you subscribe, then remember to hit that bell to be reminded of the next video. These videos come out roughly weekly. So thank you, everybody, for your time, and goodbye for now.